Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Solar Plus podcast for the month of October in 2019. I'm your host, Davey Newlove, here with co-host Sarah Lozanova, and this month we're going to be talking about batteries. So, how are you doing today, Sarah?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Davey.
Well, and thank you for joining us again for this month's podcast. It was great having you on last month.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, came out pretty good. It's a lot of fun just getting to talk about solar stuff in the industry and sharing our knowledge. I really enjoy doing that. So it's actually one of the things that sometimes I can have trouble saying too much about and annoy people. Just like, oh my gosh, this guy.
I'm at a cocktail party and this guy's talking my ear off about solar panels.
Yeah, exactly. So this month with battery storage, it's kind of a new, bigger market that's starting to boom right now. Let's go ahead and kind of lay a little bit of the foundation of the market and kind of what is it?
Yeah, so basically, solar systems have the capacity to have storage. And so that is done through battery banks typically. And there's different reasons why people would want to have storage. Some people are off of the power grid, and so they wouldn't have any solar. They wouldn't have any electricity after the sun sets without it. But that is kind of a minority of the market. A lot of people that are installing battery capacity now, it's because either potential cost savings due to time of use electricity rates, like we're seeing in California, or areas where solar system owners can't export solar energy to the grid, like you see in Hawaii, or people that just really need to have reliable power, like maybe due to a medical condition or, concern about losing electricity, which would cause a loss of refrigeration and food perishing or, things like that. So those are some of the main reasons that that battery storage is so important. And as the technology advances and prices fall, it just is making more and more sense for a larger percentage of the market.
Yeah, and I was reading a report just the other day that something like batteries dropped in price, something like 74% since 2013.
Wow.
That's a substantial drop. I mean, you're saving so much money already just having the battery, and now you're saving even a ton of money on the batteries. And as it becomes more affordable, more people are going to, jump on board with that.
Yeah, and that statistic you mentioned, I assume that's specific to lithium-ion batteries as opposed to the lead-acid batteries?
Yeah, it's the lithium-ion more specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and another thing, like right at this moment, too, the federal tax credit is still in effect. It's going to be tapering down a little bit next year, I believe, to 26%, but that means that, like you said, the prices have dropped significantly, but there's still a federal tax credit that will take a nice chunk out of the cost too.
Yeah, and for a lot of battery installs that we see, the prices that I normally see run for the batteries are about 10,000. So that's going to be taking an extra $3,000 off. Which who doesn't want to save $3,000?
Yeah, right.
And with the lithium-ion batteries, I came across a real cool article this morning talking about how there's some scientists back in, I believe it's saying in the 70s, worked on advancing lithium-ion battery technology and had many breakthroughs that have led to what the batteries can do today. And these scientists actually today was just announced they won the Nobel Prize, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that's really exciting about the market is the lithium-ion batteries are really changing the battery storage market, because before it was really just lead acid batteries that led the market, and they're good technology in some ways, but they have a lot of downsides. They some of the batteries require the fluid levels to be maintained. If they're discharged too much, it can damage the battery. There's off gassing, so they need to be vented. They're kind of high maintenance and require homeowners to just be a lot more on the ball. And so lithium-ion batteries just require a lot less maintenance, and they can be discharged more without damaging the batteries. They're smaller. They don't off gas. They're safe to have inside the home. So there's a lot of real advantages to the technology.
Yeah, and some of those advantages do have to be watched rather closely, because I know that there's been some studies that have come out that have shown that if the battery doesn't store and discharge the energy at the right times, it could actually cause more emissions, which is kind of the complete opposite of what they're trying to do.
Oh, wow. What kind of emissions?
Uh, the article didn't say, it didn't specify what emissions, but it was saying that it could just cause higher emissions. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's more specifically looking at trying to get the right signals from the grid on when it should be storing and discharging the battery.
Oh, I gotcha. So if it's less efficient in capturing and storing the energy and discharging the energy, then it's wasting energy, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be really troublesome. So it does kind of have to be watched. And I know probably one thing that could help that would be some more state and federal regulations. Uh, but the thing that's also nice with those regulations is when we see some of these new laws coming into effect regarding the batteries, like what they have in California or what they're trying to do in California right now, you're seeing a lot more opportunities for the market to boom and grow.
Absolutely. And like you said, with the prices falling, that also um, really helps boost the market.
Yeah, and saving money and being environmentally friendly is kind of a really good way to help push to get the market to grow too.
Yeah, and different states are creating different policies. Like I know here in Maine, there have been some recent policy changes that will help benefit the solar energy market, but definitely even, in a broader sense. I don't really have a sense on a national scale, but that's another way that kind of removing roadblocks and things like that through policies can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm sure that would be something that they would try to address with the Green New Deal, somewhere along the line with that.
Yeah, I would certainly think so.
And talking about the market growing as well, you know, I've I've done some research and I've seen that this more extreme weather is also a driving factor for the growth of the industry, and you're kind of seeing that in California right now. Like I have a lot of friends out there that are saying, "Oh my gosh, we're getting these outages from PG&E. What's going on?" And the whole state is kind of having rolling blackouts right now. And I guess
Oh, well.
down the grid at certain parts because of concerns over wildfires.
Right. That's a good point. And with the climate crisis, we're going to see more wildfires, more intense hurricanes, more flooding, all the kinds of things that make it really hard to have a reliable power grid. And Puerto Rico is a great example. Like a lot of people were without power for months after the hurricane that hit there a few years ago. So people with solar systems with storage were in much better shape. A lot of people were running generators for really extended periods of time.
Yeah, and I know that there's some reports that came out after the big hurricane season that they had last year that was saying people that were tied into the grid were without power for months, as opposed to people that had some solar and the battery storage backups. They were able to generate some power the very next day.
Right. And in an emergency situation, that can be really valuable. Like the ability to boil water or, like after a natural disaster, having power can really be valuable, more so than just kind of in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it really becomes more about complete self-sustainability and not needing to rely on the grid just to survive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I live in Maine and our power grid is pretty unreliable here. And so that makes a lot of people much more interested in grid storage. Like in 2013, in my home, we lost our power for 5 days. And then the next year, we lost our power for 3 days. And it generally happens in the winter. And so then that often means that people are without heat. Even if they have a forced air furnace, they may not the blower on the furnace might require electricity or things like that. So not having power can often mean not having heat, which can also mean freezing pipes. So sometimes, it's more than just not being able to watch television or have lights. It can even help prevent damage to the home.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big necessity to have, especially in those really cold months, because like you mentioned, the broken pipes, but it could also lead to death. Uh, so having heat and being able to provide your own power is something that's really important.
Yeah, like some people in my area were basically to the point of having to go to hotels, because it was below freezing. It just wasn't, their homes basically weren't habitable.
Yeah.
Especially for, children or the elderly.
Yeah, and that kind of brings up a thought that I was having. Is it really a good idea to put battery storage on every home that has solar panels or some sort of renewable energy generation? Because I know some homes, where there's lots of land, there's people that have their own wind turbines out there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it depends on a few factors, like the time of use electricity rate, if an area has that, because that can really help homeowners, because then they can use power from their batteries when the price is highest for electricity. So that can create an economic incentive to have batteries. Another one is, like I said, like in Hawaii, where you can't sell the power back to the power grid like you can in most states. And then also just what value you put on backup power. So, like, for example, I was talking to a neighbor recently that has solar panels, and her elderly mother was living with her when we had a 5-day power outage. So I think she was saying it was her oxygen, one of her medical devices wasn't working because of the power outage. So in her case, it might have really been worthwhile to have backup storage, whereas in my case, it wasn't as necessary, because of lack of, health conditions and such. So, or sometimes people really just need power because they work from home and they just have a job where it just wouldn't be acceptable to drop off for a couple days or things like that. So I think a lot of it comes down to case by case examples, and people determining just how much value they place on the backup power.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good determining factor to look at, because you don't want to recommend that people waste money if they're not going to be using it.
Right, and some of it even comes down to grid reliability. Like I was saying that I lost power for 5 days, but since 2015, I haven't lost power for more than a couple hours. So it might have really seemed worthwhile in 2013, but in the last few years, it probably would have been a waste of money. So some of it is actually hard to know because you really don't know, are you going to have a 5-day power outage next year or not? Or, and then sometimes there might be other ways to invest your money, like if you're really concerned about freezing pipes, then maybe getting more insulation might give you more bang for your buck, just to kind of prevent the home from getting below freezing, or possibly putting in a wood stove or other things like that that would help make a home more resilient, but without the batteries.
Sure. Yeah, and a lot of people are looking more into these more energy efficient and resilient homes, and you're seeing a lot of trends going in that direction. And I know that there's a couple different battery types out there that are really top of the line for stuff like that. I know a lot of people always, when I hear people ask me about solar storage, the first brand that everybody brings up is always Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, Tesla makes good batteries and they make good cars, but and one that we recommend very highly is Sonnen battery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lithium ion phosphate battery, and it includes an inverter system too, or they have an inverter that works with the battery, and it also has a 10-year warranty as well, which is way more than you would ever see in a lead acid battery. And they start at about $10,000 for a 5-kilowatt battery, including the inverter.
Yeah, and that's a pretty fair price, at least right now. And I know in the future, as technology continues to advance, that price is probably going to drop as well. Um,
Yeah.
and that also just brought, something to the top of my head. I know that there's a lot of talk about the tariff war with China, and what's going on with that. And I know that a lot of components for batteries get hit. So, when it comes to tariffs, you're seeing the battery component. Well, you're seeing the whole entire battery get hit by tariffs a few different times, which is increasing the price of them for the customers a little bit.
Yeah, and it's hard exactly to quantify how much the tariffs have hurt the industry or not, but it is unfortunate because it raises the whole cost, and then it actually hurts our domestic economy because so many jobs are actually in the solar installation end of things. There's a lot of manufacturing jobs, but there's quite a few jobs on the installation end. So it's unfortunate if the tariffs are impacting that. I believe they've just been for the solar cells and the panels, haven't they? Or are there tariffs as well?
Uh, the tariffs also hit on some metal and aluminum. So
Um,
some certain components of the batteries get hit, like not the battery as a whole in general, but just parts that are used to make them.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that the lithium ion batteries are criticized for is that they do require mining. So environmentally that is one of the downsides to the batteries is, the raw materials that go into making them, unfortunately.
Oh, so you've mentioned the uh, the couple different types of batteries, and this is something that I still get a little confused about. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the different types of solar batteries and the benefits of each, and which one you feel might be the better choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So up in Maine, we still install a lot of lead acid batteries. They were invented in the 1850s. They've been around for a really long time. The problem is they take up a lot of space. Depending on the type of technology, they can require more maintenance and off gassing. But one thing that's nice about them is lead acid batteries are very recyclable. They're widely recycled. And but then some of their other characteristics really vary, like their efficiency varies quite a bit, and like I said earlier, they can't be discharged as deeply as a lead acid battery. And then as far as lead acid batteries go, um, there's two main types. There's the lithium iron phosphate, and so that would be like the Sonnen battery. And then the Fortress battery is a lithium ferrite phosphate technology. So that's a different chemistry. And that's one of, there aren't as many of those on the market. The market is dominated more by the lithium iron phosphate, at least in the residential market. And so the lithium ion batteries, they vary, but they tend to have much, much longer warranties than lead acid batteries. So they, like a 10-year warranty is quite common. Like the Pica system has a 10-year warranty, the Sonnen does, and the Fortress battery. Those are all systems that Solar Plus installs. And then another thing to consider is the battery life, like how many cycle lives the battery can have, and that's way, way higher with the lithium ion batteries. And also the capacity and power. And capacity and power is important just for figuring out how long you want to be able to supply power to the home, and what level of power is needed. And so that's generally much. The lithium ion batteries have a much higher capacity. And another thing that's nice about them is you can add on batteries, whereas with the lead acid, it's not recommended. If you have a year-old battery bank and you want to add on some more capacity, it's not recommended to add on to the lead acid batteries. But with the lithium ion batteries, you can add on capacity as well. So that helps. Just has a lot more design freedom. and they're much smaller, and they can be located inside the home. And also, too, it's like for RVs or things like that, size really matters, or apartment living, or in more space constrained environments. That's a real plus. And the batteries don't need to be vented, the lithium ion batteries. So the off gassing isn't an issue.
Yeah, and you mentioned battery size, and one thing that that I know I was really surprised about when I saw the Pica for the first time was how small and compact that one was, and
Mhm.
that's just kind of mind blowing to me. I was like, "Whoa, you can store that much battery power in something that small? Just wow!"
Yeah, it really is impressive. And then they can just mount on the wall, and they have kind of this slick appearance too. You know,
Yeah,
lead acid batteries look, you know, they don't look like a really new slick product.
yeah, right. Yeah, they look a little bit more kind of like the big, bulky, outdated ones.
Yeah. Yeah, in my neighborhood, we have a solar system with battery backup, and we use it to run the water pump during water outage or during power outages, so that we don't also have a water outage. But we have the lead acid batteries, and then they need to be vented, and they're large, and then they were discharged too much, and so that damaged them. So they tend to just be really fussy. So unless you have a homeowner that's pretty on the ball, that's aware of what needs to be done, and is monitoring things, it's just not a good fit for most people. And there are some solar energy geeks, if you will, out there that like to do that stuff, and they don't mind monitoring things and the maintenance and things like that. But a lot of people just want something that'll seamlessly integrate. If it's installed by a reputable installer and it's designed right, that'll just do what it needs to do without a lot of fuss. And
Yeah,
and the longevity too can't be beat with the lithium ion batteries.
yeah, and one thing that you're mentioning was life cycle, and the life cycle, if I understand correctly, is how many times it can charge up and then discharge the energy as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that some batteries now get up to something like 6 7,000 life cycles, which that should last you about 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's really impressive.
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. I mean, my phone I don't even think will last that long.
Right. Yeah.
So, and one thing that we kind of briefly mentioned a little bit ago that I think would be worthwhile to talk about is the sustainability of the battery market. And one thing that I know, sustainability and renewable energy, you know, people put them together a lot, but they're two different things. And I know with solar, they're trying to find ways to recycle or repurpose. And I read an article probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago now that was talking about how uh, researchers at UC Davis in California are finding ways to repurpose old EV batteries to battery storage for homes, which that should definitely help with the sustainability of the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's actually, I'm not as familiar with how lithium ion batteries are recycled, but that is a really important thing to consider on the front end of things. But I know that the lead acid batteries are very recyclable. Like, I think the recycling, around 98% of the materials in the battery can be recovered. So that's very encouraging. And I think the recycling rates for lead acid batteries are extremely high. And I think it would be very easy to figure out how to recycle your lead acid batteries, because they're very similar to the batteries that are in cars. So there's already a robust infrastructure in place for recycling that. Um, Whereas I'm not as sure about, where you would recycle a lithium ion solar battery, because it's actually a different technology than what's in your phone. So I think you would have to do some research and find a recycling plant that's licensed to 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 do such to work on such materials.
Yeah, and you know, I, And recycling not just for the batteries, but also for the solar panels as well. Is there anything that you're looking at going on with any of that?
Yeah, that's actually been a big issue. The creating an infrastructure for recycling solar panels, and it's something that the solar panel manufacturers should really take into account when they're building, when they're designing their solar system, because an estimated 500,000 solar panels were installed in 2015. So that means that that's a lot of solar panels that are going to, in about 25 or 30 years at the end of their useful life will need to be recycled. But there isn't really a robust solar panel recycling infrastructure in place right now. So it's something that really needs to be put into place to complete the cycle for solar panels. And it's something that needs to be considered from a design perspective too.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving forward, that will only help to increase the reputation of the industry in being a clean and renewable energy source. And that's one thing that when I think of solar panels, that's the main concern that I have. And asking the question is, how can we be more sustainable and clean and renewable to continue to push things forward is very important and good questions to be asking.
Yeah, and one of the issues with solar panels is that it's a relatively complex task to recycle them because they contain so many different materials. So they have metals like lead and copper and cadmium and an aluminum frame, and then silicon solar cells and synthetic materials that encapsulate the silicon. So there's just a lot of materials. And so whenever you have such a complexity of materials, it does create a really difficult situation from a recycling standpoint. But you raise a great point, because a lot of people are going solar because they want to go green. And so finding a way to really effectively reuse the materials or recover or reuse the materials is really important.
With ideas and thoughts like that, from many people throughout the industry, that's going to be, definitely one of the best ways to help the industry to continue moving forward in the future.
Yeah, and not surprisingly, Europe is largely leading the way too in solar panel recycling. Like, they developed a mechanical and thermal treatment process a few years ago, where they can achieve a 96% recovery rate for the silicon-based photovoltaic panels. So that's really encouraging. That's good news. And so and I think it's an area where we can learn from Europe, because they tend to have much higher recycling rates and a better infrastructure for recycling in general and for waste management. So I think that the US can look to Europe and learn a lot from this.
Yeah. And, thinking of Europe, Germany is one of the countries that's really the leader. And, we also kind of touched on Sonnen, but Sonnen is, it's a German battery. But they make really good, high quality material and product. And, seeing what they're doing over there, I know that their environment is very similar to the environment in the Pacific Northwest. And to see them use solar up there should give people in the Pacific Northwest a little bit more hope that, hey, going solar here too is feasible. Because a lot of people would say, oh, it's cloudy all the time, why should we go solar? Well, you actually still can get a lot out of it. So.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because that's something that I've heard quoted from Maine, because people tend to think like, Maine, why would you go solar in Maine? But we actually have better solar potential than Germany, so if they can do it, we can do it, which means that much of the country, I think, has better solar resources than Germany. So I find that really encouraging that they are one of the leaders, because they didn't let that stop them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's all that I have for this segment. Are you have anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think that'll do it.
Excellent. Well, Sarah, thanks for joining us on the podcast, and we'll look forward to having you back again next month. And stay tuned as we will now head on to an interview with Fortress Power. Hey, everybody, this is Davey, your host for the Solar Plus podcast, and I'm here with Alex and Jean from Fortress Power, and we're going to give them an interview today. So thank you for joining us on the podcast this month.
Thank you, Davey.
Thank you.
So first question for you guys is just go ahead and, well, not really a question, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about Fortress Power, a little bit the company and the products that you offer.
Sure. So Fortress Power, we are a lithium battery manufacturer. We're based outside of Philly. And we really focus on the lithium iron phosphate technology, which is considered to be the most, or the safest lithium technology available on the market. And here in the Southampton office, we have about 30,000 square foot facility where we perform R&D and warehouse the products. And we have a thousands of systems installed really throughout the entire American continental, from Canada down to Argentina, South America, and certainly the U.S. market is our primary the market that we're focusing, and it's been growing very rapidly.
Yeah, I know the storage market has shown a lot of signs of growth, especially this year.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some numbers that Alex can share with the audience here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that from 2019, in the past recent 3 years, it's been doubling every year for the past 3 years, and then it will grow another 4 times in the next 3 years, which is unprecedented growth. So although relatively new, to your point, Davey, I think we are seeing a lot of growth with energy storage.
And from your guys' perspective, what's kind of leading the growth and driving the growth of the battery storage market?
Right. So I think it's a few different things. The first thing is, since we're unfortunately seeing lots more of severe storms around the world, it's making the utility grid more vulnerable than it ever has been before, right? So as more storms come in and utilities getting more fragile, the need for energy storage in homes is becoming more and more prevalent. Another thing that we're seeing is that as solar gets more and more saturated, some states, for example, Hawaii, are making it mandatory to have a battery when solar is installed to store all the excess power that is generated from that. And then the last thing I'd say is we're seeing some utilities are trying to take advantage of charging you more with a time of use rate. So a battery can help you save money in that regard. And a time of use rate, like in California, for example, is where from 4 to 9 o'clock, they'll charge you 2 to 3 times much for the electricity you're using than in comparison from 8 to 4 when you are at home, for example. So we're seeing a lot of different applications here, but I'd say those are probably the 3 big ones.
Well, it's kind of funny that you mentioned the different rates in California, because myself, I was born and raised in California, so a lot of that makes sense for when I was younger, my parents saying, hey, this time of day, make sure you turn off all the lights in the house and whatever you're not using. So that now makes a lot more sense to me.
Exactly.
So can you tell me exactly, what is battery storage? What is the main purpose behind it?
Sure. I mean, the battery storage, the simple way to describe it is that, you take the battery storage will take the power from the solar array or from the grid and to charge the batteries. And then you can use the power out of the battery when you need it. So that's a simple way of describe it. But I would also go a little bit more in depth with a few applications. Now, let's start with off-grid. So off-grid it's basically you don't have access to the grid, and you will put a solar and battery storage to power your entire home. Now, the other commonly used applications, backup power. So if you live in Florida, for example, right, you're going to be hit by storms, especially in September, October. Now, you might ask, well, I have my solar, but just having solar, that's not enough. When the grid goes off, your solar system actually has to shut off. By adding a battery, then it's different. It will keep your solar systems up and running. And it will basically, the battery storage will form its own island systems and power your home load. And then we also touch base about time of use applications where you basically take the power either from the solar as your first source or from the grid as your secondary source to charge the battery. And then at peak time, then you basically, instead of taking power from the grid, then you just discharge your battery, right? Now, the other application also become more and more popular. It's called self-supply. So if you're in Hawaii and the grid is very vulnerable and there's a lot of solar systems. Now, the Hawaii utility wouldn't allow you to feed any excessive power from the PV back to the grid. Now, what are you going to do? So you put a storage there. Now, during the day, you're going to use the PV to charge your battery. And then in the evening, then your battery is going to kick on to power the home. And if the battery power goes very low, then you have the grid, kick on until next day when the sun comes out again. So those are the, commonly used applications.
Sure. You made me think a little bit of some reports that I heard last year after hurricane season. And because of some of the battery efficiency that's been deployed, you had some areas that were out of power for, a month or maybe two. And with the solar deployments and the solar plus storage deployments, they're generating power the next day. So that seems like it would definitely be beneficial to customers to go with the battery storage.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I even think in the future, when certainly we're going to come to a point that it just makes sense for any customer who has a solar and to have a, battery storage. And I don't think that's going to be very far. I think we are working very hard to go to this direction. And that's going to happen, in the next few years.
Sure. With the solar battery storage, would you need any other source of renewable energy to maybe make your home completely off-grid? Or would solar plus storage be enough in itself to help you get completely off-grid?
I think in the most cases, if you are in a normal size of a house, I would say 4 people, 5 people houses, if you have a solar and the storage, you can actually do be self-sufficient. Now, of course, if you live in the bigger houses, we've seen houses that also added wind generator to it too. So their battery storage these days also smart enough that you can also integrate wind generator. Or maybe you can do that, like a thermal pump that also can increase your efficiency for heating or for cooling your house.
That's really cool. How would you say that battery storage affects grid efficiency?
That's actually very good questions. Well, if you look in the tradition power supply model, right, when the power got produced in the bigger power plant, it could be, like a coal power plant, and then it's going to be transmit through miles and 1,000 miles to your home. By doing so, actually 50-60% of power got lost just during this transmission,
Oh, wow.
long transmission distance. Now, having a solar plus storage, the beauty is that you produce your power local, you store your power local, and use your power local. So efficiency is very, very good. I mean, if you look at the entire efficiency with a good equipment, you're talking about, 80-90% or close to 90% efficient. And compared to a traditional power supply model is only, probably 50% efficient. That's an aspect, but the other aspect is actually more and more utility company realize that the value from the battery storage. So just give you an example, in New York City, now in the peak time, it's about 8 million people there. You can imagine it's going to consume a lot of power. The utility cannot supply that much power, so they have to go to a secondary market. So it could be somewhere outside of New York City, or even maybe, in Pennsylvania or some other market to buy secondary power, and that's very expensive for them. So they're looking also into have homeowners or business owners put a battery storage there. And when at, peak time, instead buying power from secondary market, they just, have to discharge your battery to power your home load to reduce the grid demand, the power demand. So for them, it's also a way to save money.
Sure, and you touched a little bit on it in that response right there. How have we seen a lot more deployments with the utility scale when it comes to batteries?
Oh yes, there's actually a lot of utility scaled projects here in the States as well as in other part of the world. I think I would just listen to news a few days ago. There was a 400 megawatt hour Tesla Powerwall being installed in Australia, and that is enough to power about for 300,000 households for an hour. And that's the same as they won't have then an hour to bridge over from the power when the power goes off. It takes time for the coal power plant to turn it on, and then have the battery be sitting between. They're going to bridge that gap, so the homes wouldn't lose the power.
Yeah, and that's always something that customers sound like they would love.
Yeah, definitely.
So we kind of touched a little bit on this a little bit ago, but can you talk about the current state of the battery storage market? Because I know it's still something that's fairly new, and a lot of people are just now starting to discover it and explore it and find out what it really is.
Definitely. And like I said before, the trend is showing that batteries are getting a lot of attention, and they are growing, 4 or 5 times in the next 3 years. This market in particular is shifting from traditional lead acids to lithium. I think this is because lithium is much longer lasting, it's safer, and it's also cleaner energy. So I think that we're seeing with that transition from lead acid to lithium, a lot more growth in that kind of regard, although it is new. And we're also seeing that it is popular, like you said, how you're from California. We're seeing that's popular on the West Coast because of these time of use rate cuts, or to misuse point, people that are trying to live off the grid to be energy independent. And I think that the current state is relatively new, but there's a lot of room for growth. And I think we're starting to see that here in 2019.
Yeah, and as the market continues to grow, we're going to see a lot more different products out there. But can you tell us a little specifically about the products that you offer and how they're different from some of the other products on the market?
Sure. Well, we focus on lithium iron phosphate technology. And the reason I'm emphasizing here again is there's a few different, lithium technology available on the market. Company like, Tesla or GChem, they use called lithium nickel manganese cobalt, which contains the element cobalt. It's pretty temperature volatile. With our chemistry, you don't have that concern because it's has very good thermal stability. And we also offer different sizes, depends on your power demand. So we start with a 5, we have 10, and we have also 18.5 kilowatt hour. So for a normal house and backup situation here in the States, then 18.5 is good. But if you live in Central Latin American market, you have plenty of solar radiation there. You probably just good to take a 10 kilowatt hour. So that's why we designed, if it can fulfill the different markets' need. On top of that, we also actually offer a cookie cutter solutions. Basically, you have the hybrid inverter, the smart inverter, and the batteries in one package. And then it does like the applications I mentioned about it, off grid, right? Or time of use or backup or self-supplying. So you can flexibly set it up and also reprogram it. And that's, been a very good, it's kind of plug and play solutions for homes or businesses.
Sure. And for you guys, in your opinion, what do you think the future of the battery storage market looks like?
I think the future really looks very good. Like, we mentioned about the growth rate, and by 2022, the U.S. market's going to hit to about $4 billion. This year we're going to be close with a 1 billion, but it's going to basically grow 4 times in the next 3 years. And we're also going to see with more advanced technology is going to come out. In a sense, the inverter, for instance, the hybrid inverter, for example, will get more efficient, get more compact. Same with the battery, you will see that it's also getting more efficient, more compact, and the cost will come down. If you look on what's happening worldwide, when storms, we talk about time of use rate, plus what the technology is going to moving to. It's really you're gonna see a tremendous growth.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Miss Yu there to the point that it's going to be an important part of not only world security with these storms, but it's also going to play a very important part to basically give people control of their own power. So in the emergence of these small microgrids, like Miss Yu mentioned with, that project in Australia where it's powering, 300,000 people with homes there for the duration of an hour, I really foresee kind of, that kind of application maybe on that scale or maybe even a smaller scale where the individual homeowner can be completely energy independent and kind of wean themselves off of using fossil fuels.
You just made me think of a question kind of off the top of my head here, if you guys feel comfortable discussing this.
Sure.
With everything that's gone on in Puerto Rico, would that be a good market to kind of expand or at least experiment with battery storage deployments?
It's a very good question. We actually shipping a lot of product to Puerto Rico, and it's an interesting pattern. Before the Maria, that's the name of the storm. 2 out of 10 PV systems will have battery storage. Now it's complete, flip over. So now it's 8 out of the 10 systems have batteries. And that's also because, the grid is completely damaged and it's just very hard. It's going to cost a lot of money for the government to reconstruct it. Instead of doing so, then they have, the homeowners or the businesses basically to invest on their own power product generation and supplier.
And that makes me think, and it's a good segue to this next question. California right now is experiencing these kind of rolling blackouts to try to combat forest fires out there. Mm-hmm. Do you think that battery deployments help out when combating climate change?
Yeah, definitely. If you look, let's just first look into the renewable energy, right? I mean, if you look at what we have done in the past, how fast the renewable energy has grown, and just by itself, it really has contributed to the climate change. Reduce the carbon emission. Now, adding a storage to it, it makes even more sense. Now, let's go back to the windstorm you just mentioned in California, that the utility has to shut off the grid. Now, if you have a storage, of course, then as a home, you wouldn't have that problem because you have your solar or you maybe have your windmill. You can power your home. And then it will help you to supply and power for your home, but also reduce the carbon emission. But also let's look in a bit bigger picture is just also take California as an example, right? When the solar is out, when you have that's during the day, when solar is at peak production, now most of people are not at home, right? So you have actually a high production than your demand. It actually end up that the utility company have dumped the power to the neighboring states, send the power to Arizona or some other places. Now have a storage, you wouldn't need it. You basically just store those power, and then in the evening you can just use it. That's a great way to improve your solar efficiency or your solar arrays efficiency. By doing so, of course, you also help the climate change in a much more efficient way.
Yeah, and it sounds like the battery storage market is really helping create more reliable efficiency for customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, definitely.
And it seems like the more logical way to go, and definitely sounds like battery storage is the future for renewable energy.
I absolutely agree.
I believe so.
Excellent. Well, I want to say thank you for being on the podcast this month and letting us interview and talk to you and pick your brain a little bit. And yeah, I hope that we stay in touch, which I know we will, as we have that partnership together going forward. And we look forward to continuing it.
Sure. Yeah, we'll be more than happy, to provide any information that we can to educate the audience. And of course, answer any question that people might have.
Of course. Thank you again, Davey.
Yeah, and actually one last thing real quick too. Can you tell us a little bit about the website that you guys have so that way maybe customers can find more information about your product?
Absolutely. If you go to www.fortresspower.com, you'll be able to go through there and see those models of storage that Jing mentioned earlier, like the 5, the 10, and the 18.5. You'll also be able to go to our resources tab, and you can learn a little bit more about some of the projects we've worked on from, Puerto Rico, like Miss you mentioned, to California, to even up in Vermont. So a lot of really interesting stuff going on our website. So again, that's www.fortresspower.com. And so you feel welcome to go there and check out some of the things we provide.
Yeah, excellent. And thank you again.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Davey.